Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Thursday to you. We have got yet another threat coming to the New England and Atlantic Canada this weekend as Tropical Storm Philippe, which has been disorganized and very difficult to track, is beginning to show us some signs that it's going to merge with a front and intensify and bring some really nasty weather northward into Bermuda late tonight and tomorrow, and then up into Atlantic Canada and Maine and southeastern Canada over the weekend into the first part of next week. And behind that, another system could develop in the eastern tropics. So we are not done yet in the tropics. In the Pacific, things are getting active. We have something that could threaten Mexico and maybe make its way into the Gulf and into the southeastern United States the following weekend. So things are going to stay very active here. But the overall picture is that quieter weather is expected over much of the U.S. except for New England, except for the Northeast and the Eastern Great Lakes as we head into next week with our first true taste of fall coming for many folks here. So there is some relief coming from the warm weather in the eastern U.S. I saw an all-time October record high was set up in Burlington, Vermont. A couple days before that was the case in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So the heat that has been plaguing us here for the good portion of the fall is coming to a very abrupt stop here this weekend. And the eastern seaboard is going to bear the brunt of that clash of the two air masses. So let's talk about where we are going to be dealing with problems here this weekend. And you'll see I've got Bermuda circled here south of Tropical Storm Philippe, which is going to grow and organize here as wind shear lessens and jet stream energy begins to fuel the storm and push it quicker to the north. And we are going to see impacts starting on Saturday across southwestern Nova Scotia, and then Saturday night into Sunday over Maine, over New Brunswick, over the rest of Nova Scotia, and eventually up into Quebec. And excuse me there, we are going to see some snow on the backside of this system. So it'll obviously not be tropical at that point, but it is going to grow in size and in the breadth of the impact it's going to have here over the first part of next week. So typical in October, we've got storms coming north that lose tropical characteristics and gain intensity and merge with colder air masses. Now behind Philippe, which is just a 40-mile-per-hour storm, it's not as powerful as models tried to make it a few days ago, but I do think it's going to re-strengthen here in the next couple of days. Behind Philippe, we've got another area to keep an eye on that's going to move off the west coast of Africa tomorrow. And at this point, I'm not seeing a threat to the U.S. or to Canada or even to the Caribbean, but we may get yet another named storm, probably our 18th, 19th storm here of the season. So all the folks in the meteorology departments that were looking at the European that was forecasting 20 named storm this year, saying there's no way because of the El Nino, are going to be unfortunately wrong with this. And as you guys know, it's never easy to make a forecast for an entire season and expect what is going to happen. But the next one behind Reno would be Sean. So we could see Tropical Storm Sean here sometime later on next week. But that is not going to be a big threat to the United States, thank goodness. So here is a look at the water vapor imagery, and several things stick out to you guys on the map here, and I'm going to kind of circle things here and spotlight them. This is Tropical Storm Philippe. Still looks very wind sheared. You can see this wind shear out of the southwest coming over the Caribbean islands and producing basically winds that go over the top of the center here, pushing thunderstorms away from the low-level center, which is somewhere in here. Everything's on the eastern side. This is Bermuda. So Philippe, as it tracks towards Bermuda, that shift has been more to the west, but that's going to bring all the bad weather on the eastern side of the circulation right over the island here tomorrow. So that is actually being drawn northwestward here by this bigger feature, which is spinning north of the Bahamas, east of North Carolina. This is an upper level trough. It's lower pressure, colder air aloft. And what troughs do is they entice storms to go around areas of high pressure, like the one we have up here, and more towards the trough. So if you think about the valley, gravity takes everything down the mountains into the valley. Same thing you can say about the upper level trough here, which is the valley. The ridges push things away from them. The troughs attract them. So this trough here is going to attract Philippe's circulation more off to the northwest. And then our next trough, which is bringing much colder air down into Nebraska, the Dakotas, and Minnesota. We were in the 90s the other day. We'll be in the 30s here tonight and tomorrow night. So this big trough here, which is drawing moisture out of the Pacific into Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. It's been very nasty here with a lot of rain across this area, severe weather last night as well. But all that moisture is going to advance northeastward. And as our tropical system comes up here in this direction, hitting Maine and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia here over the weekend, and this front moves in from the west, we're going to see everything slow down and produce lots of rainfall across this area, which is the very last thing those of you in the New England and southeastern Canada areas want to see. It's been so wet in the last few months. Unfortunately, this weather pattern favors more wetness. And behind this system here, by the way, we're going to see another trough, which draws all this moisture in the Pacific from two systems here. We've got a named storm, Lydia, and maybe a future storm, Max, here towards next week. It's going to draw moisture from both of these across Texas, across the Western Gulf, and eventually all that moves up the eastern seaboard next weekend. So we've got a big storm this weekend. We've got potentially another big storm next weekend. Flooding is going to be yet another major concern here in the Northeast, in the Mid-Atlantic region, as we get set for what could be a very wet October, which comes on the tail of a record-setting rain in September for some places like New York City. So I'd love to say I've got better news for you guys coming. We may see that by November, but October is going to remain very unsettled. Now, the rest of the Atlantic is pretty quiet. We've got this trough right here off of the Canary Islands of Africa. We've got the Cabo Verdes here avoiding any significant rain. We have a monsoon trough, which extends from the southern Caribbean, the Windward Islands, all the way over to south of the Cabo Verdes. And then a huge area of dry air aloft. There's a big area of high pressure here. Now, this high pressure zone is going to shift northeastward and allow an opening for a wave to come off of Africa and come up in this direction. That could be our next storm, because, though, we've got all these troughs here over the western Atlantic, and the ridge shifts northeast. What'll happen is whatever does come off here should recurve, so it shouldn't be a threat to the United States. So that's a big picture look at everything. I'm going to break down more detail. Here's a look at the Gulf, the Caribbean, and all you can see on the map, aside from this trough moving away from the Bahamas, is Tropical Storm Philippe. Most of that rain has moved away from the islands. We see a little bit of tropical moisture still in place over the central Caribbean and over the islands here, but that is not with Philippe. Here's a look at the Northwest Atlantic, and you can see Philippe is growing, and this trough to its west is drawing that moisture and shearing it northward. So moisture is already spreading on to Bermuda today. We also see this huge area of cloud cover and moisture moving through the Great Lakes into the Northeast. So those are the two players on the field. Florida staying dry for the time being on the western side of this system, but moisture is going to build up here in time for the weekend. The Central Atlantic, outside of Philippe, is pretty quiet. We do have some thunderstorm activity off to the north of Guyana and Suriname. That is going to head towards the Windward Islands here over the weekend. Here's our trough, and then a huge area of dry air in place in the deep tropics, which is good news. And then we see our next wave here, which doesn't really look too impressive right now, but it is going to move off of Africa later tomorrow and maybe in a spot to slowly develop next week. Right now, just a 20% chance of that happening. Here's Philippe. We've got another plane going into the system to figure out where the actual center is, and that's been a struggle in the last 2 days. Wind shear has taken thunderstorms away from the center. It's kept Philippe from strengthening, which is a good thing. And as a result, the earlier forecasts of this becoming a hurricane continue to bust, and we're looking at just a tropical storm. Right now, it's a minimal tropical storm, but it is expected to grow and get fed by this trough to the west, which will actually allow it to strengthen. You can see Bermuda, which was to the west of the path a couple days ago, is now on the eastern edge of the path. We do have a tropical storm warning in place, as the system will come by to the west of Bermuda tomorrow morning and into the early afternoon. Then it's going to speed up and accelerate and bend back to the left. It's going to get drawn west-northwestward by a trough moving into the east. High pressure to the east of it over Newfoundland and the North Atlantic will actually push it back on the westerly track, and that puts Maine in the crosshairs here for getting this system. Now, it won't be tropical at that point, as the waters up here are a lot cooler, but it is going to grow in size and will grow in the amount of rain it's going to bring into this area. So despite the fact that waters are colder, the air aloft is going to produce stronger winds that will feed into the system. So we have kind of two opposing forces here, but it looks like the baroclinic processes, that's the actual term for it, are going to allow the storm to grow and be pretty intense by the time it comes in here Saturday night, early on Sunday. And then the remains of it get drawn into our upper level low and bring some snow into parts of Ontario and Quebec as colder air wraps in. Here are the key messages from the folks in Miami. We're going to see tropical storm conditions starting later tonight. Tropical storm warning for Bermuda. Heavy rain is also going to move in later today, and that could produce some flash flooding in Bermuda. This is not going to be a major storm for Bermuda. We've already had quite a few of these brushes this year, but it is going to cause some localized problems here. Then we're going to see Philippe moving over portions of Atlantic Canada and eastern New England as a tropical cyclone, not weakening, but becoming post-tropical. So Philippe technically holds its name, but it's not going to be a tropical entity when it comes in here. But regardless, we are going to need to prepare for stronger winds and heavy rainfall in Maine, New Brunswick, and western Nova Scotia here. Here's a look at the wind history, and you can see um, just a very kind of warped track here. We saw tropical storm conditions in islands that weren't even under watches and warnings until the system moved over you. Really, the heavy rain, though, has been the big problem. But you can see the snake here, the head of it, heading towards Bermuda, and I do think we're going to see those tropical storm force winds. Here is a look at those wind speed probabilities. This is for tropical storm force winds. Bermuda is kind of in that 60%, 50 to 60% zone. Chance we'll see sustained winds of tropical storm force wind over 39 miles per hour. But even a 30% chance for like places like the Bay of Fundy, western Nova Scotia, and southeastern or down east Maine here, 20% chance of tropical storm winds in eastern Maine, northern Maine, and New Brunswick, heading up into the Gaspé Peninsula and over Prince Edward Island. So you see that probabilities actually start growing. We're not going to see hurricane force winds, but we could see 50-knot winds, so 60-mile-per-hour winds just off the coast here of Nova Scotia and over western Bermuda. So yeah, nasty storm here. Model guidance, for the most part, has clustered around an eastern Maine landfall, the GFS. Some of the global models are a little farther east into New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, but they take the circulation very quickly around to the northwest into Quebec and even northern Ontario. Here's the European ensembles, a bend back to the left just west of Bermuda here, and then a bend back to the right, and then a move right towards the U.S.-Canadian border here on Sunday morning. Intensity forecast. We are going to see strengthening here, not because the storm is going to see any less wind shear or warmer water, but because it's going to have upper level wind support for it to strengthen. It's not even going to be tropical by the time it gets into here, but it could be close to hurricane force winds. So after that, things will weaken. I don't think we're looking at a hurricane, but things have been a little bit surprising this year. So definitely something to keep an eye on. We also have a second low to the west of Philippe, and the GFS struggles with how these two are going to interact. It takes the center east of Bermuda, but everything else goes west of Bermuda or near Bermuda. Either way, you see all this rain, all this wind here. It's going to go over the island. Eventually, we're going to see this low pressure system bringing rain in Saturday towards the afternoon hours in the eastern Maine, New Brunswick, even later in the morning in Nova Scotia. Here's the next front, by the way. You see the wind flow is out of the south-southeast, which draws moisture up and over these I don't know what you even want to call them, isobars, I guess, but honestly, just areas of equal wind flow aloft. And you can see that south-southeast flow brings very heavy rain into the northeast here on Saturday, into western New England. And then the two systems kind of combine at this point. Colder air aloft lurks, so we're going to see some light snow here over Ontario by Saturday night. And then heavier snow Sunday in the morning over northern Ontario, southwestern Quebec, maybe even over into Ottawa, the capital district of Canada. We're talking about temps in the 70s and 80s Fahrenheit going over to snow showers by Sunday. So, yeah, very interesting fall pattern here. But we're not done. The system kind of sticks around here into early next week. It brings cool, unsettled weather, even some moisture up into southern New England on Tuesday and Wednesday. Very heavy rain, still a possibility in the same spots right into Thursday. So talk about a really lousy pattern where we go from this warm spell here early this October to a cool and wet pattern for much of next week. And then we are going to have to keep an eye on the southeast as moisture from the Pacific tries to come up here from the southwest. And that could be in our hair here by Wednesday next week, or by Sunday of next weekend, the 15th. Here's a look at rain totals from the GFS. And this is something we need to be concerned with. Two areas of heavy rain, one from Philippe and one from the front here. Both could bring potentially 2 to 4 inches of rain, which doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of that comes in a short order here and comes over areas that are super saturated from recent rains. Now, I don't think New York City sees the worst of it, fortunately, but an inch or two of rain is not going to be pretty for us here this weekend. And then we see heavy rains as well over parts of Nova Scotia, PEI, amounts of 1 to 2 inches. So we're looking at about, say, 50 millimeters as our high amount here, our high water mark. And then it stays wet into next week. You can see still potentially significant rains over parts of Maine, over Quebec, over eastern Nova Scotia. Here comes our moisture out of the southwest, and don't know if this forecast is going to hold, but if you look at the next storm bringing in Pacific and Gulf moisture, well, I don't think it'll be a tropical system. Look at some of these amounts here by the end of next week and next weekend. So as wet as this weekend could be in New England, next weekend could be quite a bit worse, unfortunately, with widespread amounts of 3 to 6 inches, locally higher amounts possible. And I do expect that this will shift some, so I wouldn't cancel next weekend yet, but be prepared as it could get pretty ugly. Wind totals here are going to get strong on Bermuda, 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts possible. Higher amounts over the open waters here, up to 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. You'll see that wind quickly moves in on Saturday into Nova Scotia, and then Saturday evening into Maine and New Brunswick, with wind gusts potentially approaching 60 to 70 miles per hour over a larger area. So the storm will grow. It'll bring stronger wind with it, not all from a tropical process, but from an extratropical process. And you can see the winds stay pretty gusty here into next week, 30s and 40s around the Great Lakes. On Bermuda itself, we'll see those winds, excuse me, picking up this evening, 30 to 35 mile per hour gusts. Then later tonight, 35 to 40, possibly higher amounts. So we are going to be more on the lower end of the tropical storm spectrum, but we will see potential power outages from this rain and wind. And then looking up into Atlantic Canada, we're going to see wind gusts picking up over 50 knots here early on Saturday, and then 80 to 100 kilometers per hour, not knots, over southern New Brunswick, down east Maine, and western and southern parts of Nova Scotia. Some of these wind gusts could be higher than what we saw with Lee here last month due to the fact that the storm hits from a right angle. Lee came in from the south-southwest. This is going to hit from the southeast, perpendicular to the coast, and that can often cause some frictional effects here as the winds tighten up and hit from a right angle. I know that's more meteorology than you need to hear from me, but it can lead to less than desired results as these winds hit parallel or perpendicular to the coastline. So be preparing for that. A look at the rest of the tropics shows here's Philippe and the low kind of merging into one. Here's the front coming in, big high pressure dropping down and cooling us off this weekend into the Midwest and into the deep South. Then we have to keep our eyes on the Cape Verde system, which could start to form here next Tuesday or Wednesday, southwest of the Cabo Verdes. As we look later into the week, the GFS spins up a weaker system. It would be a tropical storm here Thursday and Friday at about 40 degrees west, and it looks like it will make a turn here just west of 40 and probably get killed by wind shear. So we could have a tropical system here. I think the area we need to be more concerned with, though, is this system that forms south of the Mexican Riviera here, which I think would be Max in the Pacific, could hit Mexico as a stronger tropical storm. Then that low pressure crosses into the Western Gulf. It may not be tropical, but it is going to deepen some, and it is going to bring the moisture up into Florida here late next week, and then up the southeast coast and really all the way up the east coast. And this is kind of a nor'easter type system here by the time we get to the 15th of October, maybe the 16th in New England. So things are still going to be busy, maybe not tropically, but busy as far as rain and wind go. And this really looks like a lousy month if you're on the East Coast. Unfortunately, there's not much we can really do about it at this point. Here are the ensembles, all in pretty good agreement here on Philippe, heading up into eastern Maine, into the Bay of Fundy region here. We start to see some lower pressure showing up here later this weekend, moving off of Africa. We also see our Pacific storm, and maybe that jumps over into the Western Gulf by next Tuesday. We can see those lower pressures kind of trending towards Florida here. I don't think we're seeing a tropical storm hitting Florida. You know, this is nothing like Idalia, fortunately for us here, but it is something that we need to watch due to the fact that we've got a lot of rain coming out of the tropics here over very warm waters in the Gulf. Also a lot of wind shear, though. So we won't see, I don't think we're going to see a hurricane, maybe a subtropical storm. We may have Sean, we may end up with Tammy over here. Who knows? But something we need to keep an eye on here. But looking ahead towards next weekend, we don't see any threats here to the Caribbean or to the Central Atlantic or to the East Coast. What we see is somewhat of a mess moving through the Gulf here, and we see potentially Sean here turning to the right and becoming what we call the fish storm here, recurving over the Central and Eastern Atlantic. So we've got a lot to track here next week, but Philippe really is the main system to watch. The Pacific, on the other hand, is going to be a hotbed. We have Tropical Storm Lydia. Winds are 50 miles per hour, a moderate tropical storm. It's not moving quickly. We have an area to keep an eye on that I don't think it's going to be any threat. And then we've got an area that will likely form next week into the next tropical storm, Max. And that does look like potentially a threat to the Mexican Riviera. Why do we care in the United States? Because that moisture eventually comes around a trough and heads through Mexico into the Gulf. So we do need to watch this second system here. We also do need to watch Lydia because there are signs here that Lydia is growing, and also signs that while Lydia is expected to turn west, it's going to get stuck for a while, and then a trough in the eastern Pacific will pick it up and turn it back and return it to sender here, coming back towards the southern Gulf of California, towards this bend in the Mexican coast. This is next Tuesday, and maybe hitting Mexico as a strong tropical storm or hurricane on Wednesday. This would be Lydia. This would be potentially Max, and you can see the two systems are going to be turning to the right, and one heads into northeastern Mexico and brings moisture into Texas. The other looks like it's going to aim its moisture towards the eastern Gulf states and the southeast. So very active in the Pacific. Lydia, very tough to figure out, but models are trending more to the right, turning the system back to the left, and then making a turn back to the right, and eventually landfalling somewhere later next week in western Mexico. European model ensemble all over the place here, as you might expect, with a system that's going to slow down and be in a weak area of steering. And then, unfortunately, Taiwan has bore the brunt here of our typhoon, Koinu, Koinu, and the system is weakened after passing southern Taiwan. It is heading towards China and will bring some flooding to that area. So you can see a destructive storm pulling away from Taiwan. Things should improve on Taiwan today, but our track shows weakening, but also shows the system riding south of Hong Kong, bringing flooding to South China here in the Guangdong province here over the next couple of days. Here's that Taiwan radar, and the storm is beginning to show some weakening in the eye, but you can see it made a direct hit over the southern peninsula of Taiwan. Wind gusts on this island east of Taiwan, Orchid Island, were unofficially registered at over 210 miles per hour yesterday. That was one wind gust that could have been in a tornado-like circulation. It was elevated, but nonetheless, that's one of our strongest winds that we've recorded in Asia. And it'll be interesting to see how they go back and look at that data to see if it qualifies to, in fact, set that record. Whether or not it does, it's a powerful storm system. All right, in the U.S., we've got heavy rain still this morning over southeast Texas, but the threat for severe weather comes to an end. We're going to see heavy rain over Arkansas, Missouri, and parts of Illinois. And then as this storm moves east, it loses a lot of its punch. But we still see a slowing system, which will bring heavy rain into western New York, into eastern Canada, and into the Appalachians here late tomorrow into tomorrow night. That front puts on the brakes here on Saturday morning. Here you can see rain moving inland from tropical storm, which should be post-tropical storm Philippe, and that heads into coastal New England here Saturday morning, while heavy rain moves in across central and eastern PA and New York Saturday towards midday, and it should be very wet here across portions of New England and Quebec here during the day Saturday and even into Sunday. And then we're going to see some moisture on the tail end of our storm moving up into South Texas, which actually is going to be a blessing for many of you that need that rainfall. No severe weather. It'll actually feel kind of cool like fall here in South Texas, but that moisture streams across the western Gulf states here later on in the weekend. And you can see our front plowing southeastward, all this moisture, dew points in the 60s and 70s here, making it feel tropical here on the Gulf. That is going to get pushed away quickly by this drier air mass. Take a look at Saturday morning, dew points in the 40s in the Appalachians, 30s across the Ohio Valley, and 30s and even 20s across North Texas. So a welcome change coming as we get our first truly fall air mass all the way down to the Gulf Coast, with dew points in the 30s and 40s in places like New Orleans, Mobile, Pensacola, and all the way up into the Western Carolinas. Here's our front. It's going to stay moist in eastern New England, but turning much cooler here over the Great Lakes, over the southeast, and all the way down into Texas, where the cloud cover and the moisture overspreads dew points in the 40s here across much of South Texas. Enjoy it while you can here. Thank you all so much for your time today. I appreciate it. If you did enjoy this video, you're here for the first, second, third time, I'd love it if you could subscribe and get a daily video from me. I'll have another one tomorrow morning and Saturday morning. And if you are a subscriber and you're a returning guest, I would love it if you feel led to. You don't have to, but for $9.99 a month, you can become an official member of Josh's Severe Weather. I will be responding to those folks first. I am looking at some options to do some extra things for you guys as things start slowing down, and carrying that momentum into 2024. My goal here is to reach 15,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I don't think I'm going to have any trouble getting to that, but if you could spread the word, I would very much appreciate that. It's not about me. I just want to reach more folks and help more people. That is my calling, and I give the glory to God who gives me this calling to do what I'm doing every day. As a Christian person, I believe, as a Christian man, I believe that we're all called to do something, but we're also created to do greater things in our life. And for this is my gift to you guys. I believe truly that this is what I've been called to do. Whether or not you are a believer in God, that's totally up to you guys. I'm not going to judge you. But I think that truly inside of me, I've been given the Holy Spirit. I've been able to just bless many more people by doing what I do. John 14:6 says to Thomas, doubting Thomas, that Jesus, sorry guys, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. There is a very straight and narrow path to find Jesus Christ. There are a lot of paths you can take in your life. A lot of them look good. A lot of them look very close to the straight and narrow path, but there's really only one way to eternal salvation. Those of you that are struggling with what's going to happen to you when your time on earth is gone, we do have that path for you to find Jesus Christ, to accept him as your Savior. You can be a believer in God, but if you don't follow Jesus's way, the truth, and his life, then you're not going to come and see God eternally in heaven. I truly believe that. Again, not my judgment, just what I believe. But I was glad to discover that, to have the door open to me where I could repent, turn to God, and see God's way and what he truly desired for me. And I pray that he does the same for you, that you truly see what God desires for you. And you may not see that because God sometimes reveals himself in some mysterious ways, but we have to believe that there is something greater for us in the end. At least I choose to believe that. And I pray that you do as well. And that is why I do what I do every day. It's to share that good news with you that if you discipline yourself, turn away from the world's ways, all the paths that the world is taking you on, find the path less traveled, I should say, the straight, the narrow path towards Jesus, that because he is the truth and the life, he is the way to our eternal Lord, then you can live with Jesus in heaven, because Jesus is coming again, folks, and your time on earth is going to run out and you just don't know when that's going to be. I just pray that you find and seek him before that time does come to an end, or else I don't think it's going to end very well for you. That's just my personal belief, and probably the belief of many others, to be honest with you. But I hope you guys have a great Thursday. I hope you're preparing for the storm in Bermuda today and in Atlantic Canada and Maine tomorrow. And I'm obviously going to pray for the best possible outcome, because I would love for folks to stay safe and have minimal loss of any kind of property or life. I hope you guys have a great Thursday. If you have any prayer requests, I would love to pray for you and pray over you. If you could pray for me too, I very much would appreciate that. But I hope you guys have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow morning. God bless you.